Welcome to Bill's Aviation Podcast, where your stories are our stories. I'm a general aviation pilot, aviation writer, airplane builder, avionics developer, test pilot, and general screw-up. All stories feature Joe and his merry band of miscreants. The purpose of these stories is to educate and entertain pilots. If you have a story you'd like to share anonymously, please contact me. Today's story is titled, Almost Flying a Champ into a Tree. Bob, Joe's friend, had a beautiful old Aeronca Champ that Bob had owned since he was about 15 years old, and he had restored it twice over the years with the help of his father. To say it was a nice restoration would be an understatement. Bob offered to take Joe up for a ride in the Champ, which Joe readily accepted. Joe had a bunch of hours in a Champ, but it had been decades or more since he'd last flown one. Joe's most recent steed was his Vans RV, which is well coordinated, light on the controls, and responsive, about as far away from the Champ as you can get and still be in an airplane. The grass strip at Joe and Bob's home airport is lined with trees, not super close to the runway, but not really far away either. Bob took the front seat and Joe settled into the back seat after hand propping the gigantic Continental 65-horse engine to life. Joe also had a bunch of J3 time, so sitting in the back seat was not a big deal. Besides, he was just a passenger for this ride. After warming the oil, performing the requisite magneto and carb heat checks, setting the altimeter and trim tab, our intrepid aviators taxied to the end of the runway 33 for departure. Bob had reminded Joe that the takeoff acceleration would be less than thrilling and the climb rate would be rather anemic. In other words, normal Champ performance parameters were to be expected. Just as the Champ started rolling, Bob offered to turn the control of the airplane over to Joe, which Joe accepted. A normal departure was completed, but as the airplane started climbing, a very light crosswind started blowing the beautiful mustard and ketchup colored Champ towards a large tree on the left of the runway. Joe put in some right rudder and aileron, about what he would need for his RV. Noting nothing was happening, he put in a little more. Again, the tree continued to get larger. Finally, Bob yells, "My plane!" and grabs a stick and puts in the required amount of rudder and aileron to keep from decorating the oak tree with the Champ. Bob and Joe laughed about it and continued on for their enjoyable flight. Unbeknownst to them, those on the ground who were watching were convinced they were going to hit the oak tree and started running towards the impending crash site, a crash that never happened, thank goodness. Lesson learned: prior to transfer control of an airplane, any airplane, brief when the transfer will occur. Don't just do it on a whim. That briefing should also include what to expect when control is transferred. This is in addition to the pilot who is relinquishing control stating, "your plane," and the pilot assuming control saying, "my plane." Thank you for listening, and if you've enjoyed what you've heard, please hit the like button and subscribe by clicking on the logo in the lower right of your screen. If you really like what you've heard, please help support this channel and become a Patreon. Part of each donation will go to aviation safety and aviation youth programs. Be sure to check out next week's story about Joe getting a request to buzz the tower.